a circle in a spiral, like a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind.
Visit StogieGeeks.com/debonair for a list of retailers who carry debonair cigars. Buy some today and get a little more debonair. Welcome back, everyone, to Stogie Geeks episode 150. This is our debonair ideal segment for this evening. We're going to be talking a little bit about pairings. And Will, I wanted to tie it in with a little bit of the Defiant whiskey as well, which I'm sure will pair well with a fine debonair cigar.
You know, that's an interesting point. You know, I think that Defiant whiskey would go real well with the Habano.
Yeah, I agree.
I do think it would.
It'd probably go well with the Maduro as well.
It could.
It's pretty versatile. What most people, now I've let at least almost a dozen people try that whiskey, Will. Everyone has liked it. Everyone, I think 100% across the board, Will, says it drinks more like a scotch than it does a whiskey. And I've had people say, well, I'm not really a whiskey fan, and I let them try it, and they're like, well, that's really good, right? Because it smokes more like it tastes, rather, more like a smoky, peaty scotch than it does an American whiskey. And that's one of the reasons why I really love it. When you pour any kind of whiskey or spirit, and even the ones I mix with, Will, in my mixed cocktails that aren't of the highest quality, all the way up to, you know, the highest end scotches that really don't ever last very long in my liquor cabinet, because my father-in-law and I drank them at a pretty good clip. My mother-in-law too, which is pretty funny. But so you just pour a little bit in your glass. You know, my glass is empty. I drank a little before. I pour a little bit in my glass. You know, I give it the nose, as Apollo was saying. I take a sip, kind of switch around my mouth, really get the flavor on my palate. And, you know, like I said, from the lower end, very inexpensive mixing style rye whiskey, bourbon, American whiskey, even lower end scotches, I'll do that to understand the flavor profile of what I'm drinking, so that I can then move on to say, okay, I'm going to drink it neat. I'm going to drink it maybe with just one ice cube. Maybe I'm going to drink it with the ice cube ball in the middle of the glass. Maybe I'm going to use it in a mixed drink. But I have to understand the flavor profile of that particular spirit before I do anything else with it. Yeah. And I always do that. And it's kind of similar to tasting cigars, right? Like you do a cigar tasting and you smoke all the different components. But when you first light up a cigar, you go through the various motions, right? You sniff the foot, you sniff the wrapper, you do the cold draw, you light the cigar, you take the smoke in your mouth, you do a retrohale, and you do all those different things to understand the flavor profile of that particular cigar. You do a very similar thing with spirits. And again, like I said, Will, I like to take a little bit of it just neat, with nothing else in it, to understand what that spirit is all about, and then make the decision, okay, now I'm going to try it maybe with a splash of water, or I'm going to try it with just one ice cube, or maybe I'm just going to put it on the rocks, or maybe I'm going to use it in an old-fashioned, or maybe I'm going to use it in a Tom Collins, or whatever kind of cocktail that I'm making. The Defiant whiskey so far, Will, and I haven't given it to my cocktail sommeliers, right? We have wine sommeliers. We have two resident people who are very much cocktail mixologists. I haven't given it to them yet. They've been traveling. I haven't been here in studio. I'm curious to see what kind of cocktail they can make with it. In my estimation, the Defiant whiskey, I would drink probably with just like one ice cube in it, just to make it cold a little bit, dilute it a little bit, and I would pair that with a nice cigar, just straight, because it drinks like a scotch so far. Now, when Apollo or Jack Daniel get a hold of it, they're probably going to make some fabulous cocktails. I've made some cocktails with it so far, but I haven't been quite happy. The people I've given them to really liked them, but I haven't been quite happy with that. So, and I think that kind of speaks to being debonair, right? Well, you want to take things and treat them like the fine items that they are, right? A fine whiskey, a fine cigar, you treat in a similar kind of manner.
I definitely agree with that. You know, it was interesting. I was at Phil Zengi's booth, and I got to try some of the rums.
Yes.
And I had never tried the rums before. Well, the last rum I went for was a surprise. It was the coffee rum.
Yep.
And I loved it. Because, like I said, I started with the straight rum, and I loved the rum, but that coffee, I didn't think I'd like it, but I figured, let me just get something. I just wanted to give it a shot. Oh, my goodness. That thing is like, that has that nice, it's a very heavy coffee. It's more like a coffee spirit than a rum it's going to taste like.
Right.
But it's really, and the first thing I thought of, man, I got to put a Debonair Maduro with this.
With the coffee rum, yeah.
With the coffee rum.
Yeah, yeah.
And even though it had a strong coffee flavor, what I want to say is it works. And when you're pairing, do you find you want to let the spirit finish first, or do you want the cigar to finish first?
I tend to take a sip of the spirit, and as that is finishing, I tend to take a puff of the cigar and see how the flavors kind of go together. I don't want to take a puff of my cigar too early, right? Because I kind of want the spirit to do its thing on my palate, so to speak, and then kind of complement that with the flavors of the cigar.
And that's what I was doing. That's what I'll do too. It's the same with the Defiant, which because I love that. I mean, there's some really good flavors, and I find you want to let that do its thing, as opposed to have the cigar. But I know some people sometimes will go for the cigar first. That's why I was.
Yeah, and you can experiment. The point is, I think, of being debonair about it is, as I was saying before, is to take your time, right? Is to try a little bit of that spirit, get the aroma from the nose, sip it, let it fully coat your palate, let it completely dissipate, then maybe go to your cigar, do the same thing. Like I said, you sniff the foot, you sniff the wrapper, you do a cold draw, you light it up, you take it in your mouth, and then you retrohale, and then let that kind of dissipate, then go back to the spirit and kind of let those flavors do their thing together. And to me, being the Debonair Ideal segment is to remember all of those things, is to take your time when you're doing a tasting. As you said, you're at the Debonair booth, you're trying their rum. Really take your time and sit down and analyze all of those different flavors and take your time to get the aroma from both the cigar and the spirit, taste both the cigar and the spirit fully, and, take a puff of your cigar first, then try some rum. Maybe then cleanse with something like a seltzer water, and then doing it the opposite, and just really see how those flavors work together is really, in my opinion, the Debonair. I see a lot of people that are just, lighting up a cigar with beer and, just puffing away in their cigar, drinking their beer. Like, it's not really a pairing. When you do kind of a pairing like that, you want to have this heightened sense of awareness on for all of your senses, so smell and taste, where it hits on your palate, and you want to take your time and really analyze and experiment with those different flavors and aromas.
Yeah, and to your point, going back to the ice, I'm really not a fan of ice in a lot of them because I find it dilutes it. So unless you need it diluted,
right?
If you want it, I'd go cold. Go with the ice balls. Yes. That's the way to go. But
yeah, even my really high-end scotches, a lot of times I won't even put them over the ice ball. I feel kind of guilty putting a 21-year, a 30-year-old, or 40-year-old scotch over an ice ball.
Right.
But I will, like I said, always taste a little bit of it first and then make the determination as to where I want to go, as to how I want to drink it. Some, I think, drink a little better by adding a little dash of water. And you can experiment. Let's say you got a nice bottle of scotch or rum, like Phil makes at Debonair. You got a bottle. I try it first straight, and then I might experiment. Then I'll put a little bit of water in it and see what it does. Then maybe I'll take an ice cube and see what it does in the next kind of tasting. And then maybe I'll try it over the ice ball and kind of experiment as to what it does. And with spirits, you can do that. With cigar, the only thing you can do is light it up and smoke it. So you're kind of limited in your options. But I think the focus of this segment for me, Will, is to really kind of take your time and again, experience those aromas and flavor and taste kind of individually. And I think you're going to be much happier with your pairings of cigars and spirits and cocktails.
I agree. I agree.
I'm interested to see what Apollo and Jack come up with for cocktails for the Defiant Whiskey as well.
Yeah, and they told me there's some recipes that Defiant Whiskey has that will get up there as well. I was talking to their Mark today from Defiant Whiskey, and he told me about. So yeah, they do have some recommended recipes.
Oh, good. We'll definitely make those.
We'll check those out. Yeah,
we'll definitely make. We get a fully stocked bar here most of the time. The perishables are one thing we don't normally stock. So if we know what cocktails we're going to make, we get lemons, limes, oranges. One time we needed eggs for cocktails. We get the perishables when we know what cocktails we're going to make. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah,
that they have some recommended cocktails, because we'll definitely make them and try them. Yeah,
and if you haven't checked out the episode we did with Jack Daniel on making cocktails with bitters, that was a real education for me. And there's some parallels to cigars too, so it's blending cigars as well.
I tell you what, I'm really looking forward to get a hold of some of that Debonair rum. That's another thing that I'll let Apollo and Jack. I mean, they do some fabulous things with rum. I mean, Jack has some rums that he'll throw on the top of an old fashioned. I mean, he turned me on to some of these black rums and mojitos. Apollo did the mojito show with us. So they do some fantastic things with rum. So when they get a hold of that Debonair rum, I can't wait to see what they come up with. And
I know there's a lot of rum fans out there. I hear about the Flor de Caña, which is great. I'll put Phil's rum against anything. And I'm a novice rum, I'm going to say it, but I will put that against anything in my palate.
Well, you've been to Nicaraguan and Dominican, right, Will? And you've sampled a lot of rums down there as well. That's a big drink down there to drink either in a cocktail or as a spirit on its own as well.
Yeah, I was down at Drew Estate, and they did a Flor de Caña tasting one night with the different aged rums, and it's just real interesting to go in parallel with those as you go to some of the older ages. It's interesting how it changes.
Nice. Well, that concludes our Debonair Ideal segment for this evening, and we've got some very special interviews coming up. Christian Aroa is going to come up first, then Jonathan Drew. These are outstanding interviews. You're going to want to stay tuned. I know it's kind of late, but you're going to want to stay up late tonight and watch these interviews. They're just absolutely awesome. We're going to air those next. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to Stogie Geeks episode 150.